me do just a quick show of hands if I can. How many of you know your grandparents' first names? Okay, quite a few of you, but listen, it's amazing when you start asking this question that people have no idea. I don't know who my grandparents, what their first names are, their grandma and granddad. They're there, and here's the part I want you to understand. We're just a few decades away of being totally forgotten. I mean, welcome to New Life, right? I mean, but the truth is that, listen, it's not long. I mean, we may be able to go back 2 or 3 generations and really understand who we are physically, but you start thinking about that. Beyond that, we really don't know. We don't have a connection point. But spiritually, I want you to understand the Bible teaches us that we can know those things. We can understand a little more depth about who we are and those kind of things. And so if you're brand new to this whole Jesus and God and church kind of thing, I want you to understand, and I want to build up, because God wants you to understand, I want you to get in on what I'm doing. I don't want you to be a passive spectator. I don't want you to be one that just comes and sits back. I want you to be an active participator so that you can know what's going on in your life. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at a fellow in the scripture by the name of Peter. And many of you know about Peter, many of you don't. But Peter was one of those guys that he was a open your mouth, insert foot kind of guys. I mean, he let his words get ahead of his thoughts. And listen, if you can relate to that, if you've ever done stupid with what you've said and done, which I can relate to every week, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And do it. Peter's your guy. He's the one that you do. And so if you've made mistakes, you're going to relate to him. But today we're going to look at 2 stories back to back, and let's just read them through. And they're found in Luke chapter 8, starting with verse 40. It says, "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. And then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying." And so here it is, Jesus is showing up, and this guy Jairus meets him at the dock, and it says that Jairus, you might take note of this, it says he was a synagogue leader. And you say, so what? What's that mean? That'd be the equivalent in our day to being the mayor or to be on the town council. I mean, he was an important dude, all right? And so here it is, this young, fledgling movement, the Way, the Christians, they now have the synagogue leader that's, I mean, you got to understand, man, to get somebody of that importance, man, it could have a lot of impact, right? I mean, it could have a lot of importance. We get the mayor, we get the city councilman. I mean, it could be important to what was happening. And so I don't think that it was blind to the disciples. I think they understood that was going on. But I will say this. Christians, we often like to look at celebrities. We often like to look at those that have a big name and somehow think that's what's going to push the movement forward, right? That's what's going to impact. But oftentimes that's not at all how God works and moves. In fact, I would just encourage you to write this down, that God loves doing extraordinary things through very ordinary people. I mean, the disciples knew here was an opportunity. Jairus was important, and they understood it. But listen, they needed to get there fast. But I want you to look at what happens next. Verse 42, it says, as Jesus was on his way, he was going to Jairus' house, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Note that, 12 years. But no one could heal her. She came up behind him, and she touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. And Jesus said, who touched me? Who touched me? And when they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know the power has gone out from me. And then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, she came trembling and she fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. And then he said to her, daughter, your faith is healed you. Go in peace. I mean, We've talked about this story a lot even this year, but I love this story. I love it. I mean, it's almost comical when you come to it. Here it is. The crowds have come to see Jesus, and listen, they're smashing in around him is what it says, and he's asking the question, who touched me? I mean, it's crazy, right? It's silly. I mean, crowds pushing in. It's almost like going to a rock concert and somebody's doing the crowd surfing thing and everybody's holding them up and doing, and all of a sudden the dude just surfing, the crowd says, who touched me? Right? It doesn't make sense. I mean, why in the world? I mean, it doesn't make sense what was going on, but it also doesn't make sense. He's on the way to an important man's house, Jairus' house, the synagogue leader, and in the midst of that, he stops in the middle of the crowd to deal with one woman, one that I'll say has been ignored by the crowd. She's been neglected by society, and Jesus stops to take care of her. It's kind of interesting, and when you talk about this woman, she'd been sick for a long time, but some of the things we know about her, she was poor. She was obviously very lonely. I mean, she had been going on for years and years being the outcast of society. And you say, how do you know that? Well, because somebody that had this issue of bleeding, it meant that by law they were considered unclean, right? We understand that they weren't legally clean. You couldn't spend time with them. In fact, the religious leaders, they taught that meant you were cursed. It meant that you had judgment upon you. Don't hang out with people like that. But listen, this woman, in all the stuff that was going on, she still musters up enough courage to take a massive risk, right? She's not supposed to be around clean people because anytime she gets with somebody, she makes them unclean too, right? She passes on the same thing, but unclean meaning you can't go into the temple to worship. You can't be a part of what's going on, but she goes into the crowd where she knows she's not supposed to be, and I'll guarantee you the people in this community knew who she was, but she went anyway. She pressed through the crowd anyway, knowing that they're going to be disgusted at her. What are you doing here? Why don't you go home where you belong? Why don't you stay exactly the thing? But listen, this woman pressed through. Why? Because she was desperate to get to Jesus. This is important that we not miss this. And listen, the reality is it pays off for her in the end because her whole life has changed. It's radically changed. And I'm just going to say this to everybody here that's listening. You have no idea when God wants to use you. You have no idea. You don't understand what it is. And in fact, I'll say this, your greatest impact of your life is going to come when you least expect it. When you're unprepared for it, God's going to use you. And for the woman, she's been suffering with this bleeding issue for how long? 12 years. I mean, suffering year after year. She's been praying multiple times a day. God, would you do something? Would you get rid of this? For 12 years. Listen, I just want to just do it. You may have walked in today and have some huge issue that you've been praying for. How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to approach this? And it's going on and on and on. I want you to learn the lesson of this woman because it's just simply this. Don't get up. Give up. Just run to Jesus. Go to him because there's always hope. There's always hope. Say that out loud with me. There's always hope. There's hope that he can do more in a moment, in an instant. When we come to him, then we can do in a lifetime of striving. Listen, some of you you're testimonies to that. You're striving, God, deal with this, take care of this, and you're trying to do it. You're stressing out, you're worrying, you're freaking out. And listen, in a moment, listen, I'm talking in an instant, when we finally give it to God, that he can surrender it. Look, go on to verse 49. It says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and it keeps bringing out this part, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. I mean, there's desperation in this. Your daughter's dead. And hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, look at this, don't be afraid, just believe. Just believe, and she will be healed. you just got the word, your daughter's dead. Don't worry, just believe. She'll be healed. Just believe. Somebody say just believe. Just believe and she'll be healed. It says when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James. Make note of who he's letting in. Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. And listen, Jesus says, stop wailing. Stop wailing. She is not dead, but what? She's asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Somebody say, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. And then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. I mean, this is an amazing story. But so they get to Jairus' place, and listen, the girl is already dead. She's dead. People are wailing. They're crying. And literally, he can kind of sense the way this story is going. His disciples had to be disgusted. What do you mean? I mean, listen, do you think that they were probably thinking, if you hadn't have stopped on the way there, probably you would have got there in time. Right? I mean, why? Why did you stop? I mean, listen, you stopped to a woman that everybody in society put off. And listen, the religious leader, the synagogue leader, Jairus, was called. I mean, you were called to something important. I hope somebody's listening right now. There's something powerful when we look at that. And then he goes in and he grabs just a couple of guys, right? Peter, John, and James, and the girl's parents. And then he makes the statement, she's not dead, she's what? And it says they did what? They laughed at him. They laughed at him. And I don't know, you could talk a million different directions with that. Was it, dude, I saw her, she's dead. Or was it out of pain? Was it, I don't know, but they laughed at him. And he ignores the lack of faith, and Jesus grabs the girl and he raises her from the dead. Right? I mean, this is, you talk about miracle beyond miracles when you start looking at this thing. And I want you to think about this girl's life for a minute. What kind of story is she going to be able to tell from here on out? I mean, what's the story that's in her? Think about her parents. I mean, listen, synagogue leader just came to faith in Jesus, right? You better say, wow, when you really understand and unpack that. How old was the girl? She was 12 years old. How long had the woman suffered with this issue of bleeding? 12 years. She'd been praying every day for 12 years. Every day, God, I want you to take it from me, remove it from me. And listen, Jesus knew what was going to happen that day, didn't he? He knew that it was going to be gone. And I'm going to ask you a question. I asked you a minute ago. Maybe you came in here with something you've been praying about that's huge. And you look at, do you think that God knows the day, the moment that he's going to answer that prayer? You know, he's just waiting. He's just waiting. He's waiting for the day he's going to answer it and watch you just be blown away. And just like the parents were and seeing this story, and you hear all these things. But I don't think the most impactful part of the story was the miracle, this girl being brought to life from the dead. I don't think it was. Look at the next verse. It says, when Jesus arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except for who? Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Now, my question to you is this. Why Peter? Why Peter? I mean, we already said from the get-go, he was the open your mouth, insert foot kind of guy. But listen, he had just questioned Jesus on the road there, right? He had just got through it. Then when Jesus says she's not dead, she's just sleeping, Peter did what? He laughed. He laughed. I mean, you look at why in the world would we do it? And I'm just going to say this, that God's calling on your life is bigger than your lifetime. It's bigger than your lifetime. It's not true automatically, but when we intentionally choose to step in on mission with Jesus, that's what this whole Difference Maker series has been about, that when we choose to do it, it's bigger than that. Well, how in the world do I do that? And I want to just end with a huge truth, and I want you to get this big time. Because if I'm going to be a difference maker, you know, there's not a person I know alive that doesn't want to be used by God. There's not one of us. We all want to be used. We all want to be tools and sharply used tools in the hands of God. But how do we do that? That's what this whole Difference Maker series has been about. It's us understanding intentionally, I've got to get on mission with Jesus. Intentionally, meaning I have to choose it. I have to make a decision whether I want to be a difference maker or not. And I want you to understand how Jesus operated, because this is going to mean a lot to how we operate right now ourselves. Listen, and Jesus, he operated this way. He just seen Peter ask question and question his leadership on the road. He had just watched Peter laugh. And listen, he operated like this. Listen, he brought somebody with him. And I'm going to challenge you that, listen, you want one of the greatest leadership principles that's out there is bring someone with you. In fact, I want you to say that out loud. Bring someone with you. Who are you going to bring? Who are you going to bring around you to get in on the mission and the activity of God? We believe it passionately that every one of us is called. We're called of God to be on mission. We're called to be active and a part. But listen, as you go live on mission, you were made for it. Don't go alone. Don't go by yourself. And what I mean is just simply, you got to bring somebody with you. It was the model that Jesus used most often. Very intentionally, he included people and he brought people along with you. How many of you would disagree with this? Jesus is the greatest leader of all times. Would y'all disagree with that? No. But listen to me. Jesus never wrote a book. Never. He never held a political office, right? He never left a small geographic area in the Middle East. I mean, he just had, but yet here we are 2,000 years later, over 2 billion people are now followers of his. That's pretty good leadership. That's pretty amazing when you think about, I mean, he died when he was 33 years of age. He only had 3 years of public ministry, but yet all this following, that's incredible leadership. And listen, his motto was bring someone with you. Bring somebody with you. Listen, how many times when you read through the Gospels do you see Jesus taking somebody intentionally along with him in what he was doing? The answer is, I don't know how many times, but I can tell you, you start reading the Gospels, you'll see over and over and over again where Jesus is taking somebody with him while he's doing ministry, taking somebody with him while he's praying and healing the sick. And so here we see the model. He took Peter, who had just questioned him, who was full of, whatever, she's dead, dude. I mean, I could just, you had the biggest opportunity Jesus is possible with Jairus, and dude, what is going on? But listen what Jesus said. This is Matthew chapter 28, 19, 20. It says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. It says, therefore do what? Go. Go. You know, that go is a participle that's a part of this passage, and it literally means as you are going, right? As you are living your life, intentionally take somebody with you. Bring someone alongside of you. Don't do it alone. As you go, bring somebody with you, and then I want you to make disciples. I want you to live this out. And so there's an intentional effort that I think a lot of us in the church have forgotten. This is such a simple effort, but I've got to bring somebody with me. I've got to bring them along so that they can hang out with me. And he ends the passage saying, listen, I'm going to be with you always, all the way to the end of the age. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to turn my back on you. And here's the part I want you to get, church. If Jesus is in the driver's seat of your life and my life, listen, it's probably not so much of me taking Jesus with me. It's more about Jesus taking us with him, if he's in the driver's seat. Is anybody connecting the dots here with me? I want you to not miss this reality. And so what he did for the disciples 2,000 years ago, he wants to do for you today. He wants to take you with him. He wants to take you, and listen, he wants us to model it. I want you to also bring someone with you. Let me hear you say that. Bring someone with you. Who are you going to bring? Who's going to be the one for you? Parents, I want to give you just some practical examples when we talk about that. When you are going on mission for Jesus, when you're serving him, listen, bring your kids with you. Bring your kids with you. Why? Because, listen, most of our faith is caught, not taught. Let them see you living for him. Let them see you be an example. Next, parents, bring your kids' friends with you too. Let them bring, and I'll just say 3 words to this: Saturday night sleepovers. Listen, I don't know of a more powerful tool than when your children are young. Let them have friends over on Saturday night and say, on Sunday morning, we go to church. We go to worship the Lord, and you bring those kids. Listen, you may be the closest example of what Jesus is about that those kids will ever see. Saturday night sleepovers make a huge, huge difference. Next, as you serve in a ministry, invite someone to serve with you. Now listen, New Life, we need to learn this. As you serve in a ministry, invite one to serve with you. In fact, go ahead and put that graphic up. You remember when I introduced this graphic last fall? Listen, the next man up, right? I mean, this is important. One of the things we need to understand that we've always got to be looking for the next man up. Who's going to step up? And so if you sign up and say, hey, I'll be a greeter out here, listen, why don't you just simply do this? Hey, invite your friend and invite your kids, invite the people around you. Why don't you come serve with me? If you're an usher, bring somebody with you. We can do that. Absolutely, you can do that. If you sign up to be working life kids, sign somebody up to do it with you. If you're going to generosity feeds and you're going to serve and feed meals, bring someone with you. Why? Because it's caught, not taught. It is powerful. I think it's the best discipleship method that's out there, that when we understand that, next man up. I'll say with friends and family, bring them with you as you try to live out your faith. I just got through talking about some things, but next Sunday we're doing a little event called Friend Day, right? Bring somebody with you. You say, they don't know the Lord. That's exactly why we bring them around. I believe in serving Jesus. People are drawn to Jesus. It's something powerful that we can do. When we do generosity feeds, there's opportunities like nothing else. Lori and I, we have started on Tuesday nights, we've started inviting people to our house. Some of you thought that we just like you and we invited you to come eat dinner. No, listen, truth is, we want to disciple you. We want to speak into your life. We want to rub off on you. And I believe the best way of doing that is just getting up close to somebody, just getting around people. It rubs off. It's how Jesus did it. He always took people with him. So bring someone with you. Let me hear it again. Bring someone with you. Who are you going to bring? Who are you going to bring, church? Listen, I mean, or is it going to be one of these where we hear it and say, yeah, I agree with that, but we go get in our car and we do nothing? I mean, are you with me? I want this to, man, if we're going to model the leadership lessons of Jesus, this is it. He was always including somebody else. He was always bringing them in. And when we talk about this, sometimes we're scared to invite them for lots of reasons. Maybe the same reasons Jesus could have had with Peter, right? I mean, I'm sure when he thought about it, impetuous jump into it, Peter, listen, it would have been way easier for Jesus to say, man, it'd just be easier for me to do this by myself. Right? You ever had anything like that? You want to bring man, if I bring them, it's going to confuse and mess. It'd be easier to do it by myself. Or, hey, listen, I never know what's going to come out of Peter's mouth. I mean, he's embarrassing sometimes. I mean, you could go on and tracking this out. But, folks, I want you to understand when you bring somebody with you, there's really two things that could happen that when you bring them with you. And the first is just simply your assessment of them might be wrong. Your assessment, in other words, you think they can't handle it. They're not ready for this. They can't deal with it. Listen, your assessment may be wrong. There may be way more to them than what you realize, right? Or secondly, you may be right. You may be dead on right, but God is going to use the failure to grow them. Anybody here ever grown because of failure? Yeah. I mean, it's God's primary way of growing us. And that's exactly what might happen with them. And parents, some of you, I'm just going to speak this to you. Your job is not to protect your kids. Your job isn't to keep them from failure. No, your job is to teach them to trust God. Right? In the midst of failure, that's the biggest and the best lessons your kids will ever get. And listen, we like to hover over our kids and keep them from all problems. Listen, you're gonna create insecurity. Anyway, I could preach a whole nother message based on that. But listen, I want you to think about Peter for a minute. What happened to him through this? I think he got it. Oh my gosh. Listen, because Jesus brought him with him, Jesus can even raise the dead. He can raise the dead. Even death can't stop him. I mean, listen, what would have happened if Jesus hadn't have brought him with him? I mean, listen, the dude just questioned him, just laughed at him when he said, no, and listen, but Jesus brought him along. Do you think that was by accident? I don't think their names specifically who got to come in and see this take place. Now follow me. He wouldn't have learned that lesson. Acts chapter 9, verse 36, it says, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. It says she was always doing good and helping the poor, and about that time she became sick and she died, and her body was washed and placed in the upstairs room. Lydda, the city she was in, was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. And Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room, and all the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and the other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. And Peter sent them all out of the room. Notice this. She sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and he prayed, turning toward the dead woman. He said, Tabitha, get up. Say, get up. And she opened her eyes. And seeing Peter, she sat up, and he took her by the hand and he helped her to her feet. And then he called for the believers. Now look at this, especially the widows, and he presented her to them alive. And this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. You say so? Listen, Peter healed Tabitha, and I guarantee you start overlaying this with the story of Jairus' daughter being healed, and it is eerily similar. What if Jesus hadn't have taken Peter with him? What if he had, it says believers were all over Joppa. Because it took somebody with him. Anybody connecting the dots here? God's a connecting the dots kind of God. Listen, I want you to bring somebody with you. I don't want you to do it alone. I don't want you to worship alone. I don't want you to serve alone. I don't want you to go through life alone. I want you to intentionally bring somebody with you. I hope this is starting to connect the dots. And so God's calling on your life is bigger than your lifetime. It's always bigger. It's always bigger when we intentionally engage Him in it. And we understand that He wants to to use me. But listen, if you bring somebody with you, listen, it changes their whole eternity. They'll never be the same. Church, I hope that you're hearing this. And so listen, let me ask you a simple question. We've gone through this series, and I've tried to unpack it in such a way that there's a calling on every one of our lives. God's calling us to join Him on mission. And when I join in on that, what could happen in people's lives around me? Listen, it's not in having some canned, recited over and over thing. No, it's being just bring somebody with you and watch Jesus change them. Watch the power of God begin to work and to move. And so what is God calling you to do? Who in specific is He calling you to? Who's the person? I mean, we're getting ready to celebrate Friend Day. Who is God calling you to invest in and to invite, to bring alongside of you? Who is the one that is there? And better yet, just ask the question, who do you know that doesn't know God? You know, it's really where it comes down to. But some of us don't really care. And church, I'm going to tell you, we're about to get more and more uncomfortable because we're going to talk about this a lot. Because listen, our job is to be ministers of reconciliation. God has put us here to bring somebody else with us. Not to leave that to the pastor and the leaders in the church. No, it's every one of our jobs. Any of us that know Jesus, the whole point of His still leaving us here on this side of heaven is so that we can be ministers, agents of His grace, and taking that down. Who do you know? Now I'm gonna introduce you to a saying I want us to start doing. Inside your program, I put a little card that just has the word yes on the front of it. And I'm gonna ask you, come on, church, don't go there for just a second. We'll open those in just a minute. I want to ask you is, will you put your yes on the table? The table being the altar of God. Will you put your yes on the table? In other words, follow me clearly on this. No matter what Jesus asks you, will you have predetermined obedience? Yes. Say yes. Doesn't matter what He asks you to do. Jesus, I'm in. Doesn't matter who He asks you to invite. The answer is what? This is heavy. I'm not asking you for playing around. I'm asking you, yes, and if you have that card, I want you to pull it out, and I want you to go ahead and fold it with me. It's in your program. If not, here in just a minute, I'm going to show you where you can get one. I'm going to ask you to do something with those. On the inside of this card, it just has a place for your name. I want you just to write your name there right now. Every person here, I want you to write your name there. And then the next line in big bold letters, it says, who's coming with me? I've wrote down the names of 3 of my friends that don't know Jesus. 3 that I'm going to intentionally, on purpose, go to. I don't know if they'll say yes or no. They may laugh at me. I don't know. But I'm going to go to and I'm going to ask. And here in just a minute, I'm going to ask you, when we stand to sing our final song, I'm going to ask you to walk down front here, and I'm going to ask you to put your yes on the table. God, doesn't matter what you ask. It doesn't matter what you ask. I'm going to say yes. But folks, listen to me. God has called us to go into all the world, as I'm living, intentionally, to make disciples of all nations. Right? Everywhere we go, everything we're doing, that needs to be in our mindset. It needs to be in our thought pattern. When I've got a waiter or a waitress, listen, I need to be a part of that. And I'm going to ask you, though, as this song is played, that you simply come and put your yes on the table, yes on the altar. If you don't have a card, there's a stack of them up here, so you can feel free to grab one. But folks, listen, my prayer, this stage becomes littered with the yeses of the people that say, I want to be a difference maker. In fact, church, I want you to understand, This really tells me if you got what we've been talking about the last 8 weeks. If you don't, you don't understand the whole emphasis of why we say, God, I want to be different. I don't want to be different just to be strange. I want to bring somebody with me.